Hello, YouTube. So we're going to be doing my analysis of the Starship explosion. This is just going to be a straight up analysis of the stuff which is kind of obvious when you look at it, but I've not seen anyone actually do a decent analysis of it. So, yeah. This is actually no, that's not true. I have seen some interesting analyses, but none of them have covered this. And right, so we've got three feeds here, which all kind of show you different things. We've got a distant shot here, which according to the file name is the launch of Starship from Isla Blanca Island. Isla Blanca, well, something like that. We've got the SpaceX feed here, and then up in this corner, we're going to have the Everyday Astronauts feed. And we're going to start with you've got a progress bar here. Progress bar in green goes from launch to explosion. And it's doomed from the start. They've got 3 engines out according to the schematic, probably more. Certainly by the end of the flight, it looks like about half the engines have gone. Which, yeah, that's not so good. Now, is this damage from the launch blast? I'm skeptical about that. There's a lot of thrust coming out of the engines, and it's all going down, such that if you actually take a look at where the stuff tends to come out, it's out the side. For stuff to actually come up into the engines, it seems like a bit of an ask. Stuff has to come up against the blast of the engines, and I'm not so sure that that's what's killing your engines. So when they did the test firing, they had even at half thrust, 3 engines out or something, 2 engines shut down or fell to light or something. There's the Starship comes off the launch pad drunk, which you see it very clearly up here. It's drunk and then it hooks around and straightens up. If I had to guess, that's simply because the asymmetric thrust from the takeoff, and it takes the gimbal engines a little while to correct that. And I've seen Scott Manley. He says that this is maybe a pad. It's swinging away from the tower to try and not damage it. That means it's kind of swinging towards the tank farm. So I'm not quite sure what the deal there is. Anyway, so it swings around a bit, and I should stress, right, that I'm stunned that it looks like the Everyday Astronauts got a much more stable feed than the SpaceX. If you take a look at the SpaceX feed, the actual acoustics of the rocket are sort of distorting you see the rocket wobble, from frame to frame. That's the acoustics of the rocket that are actually sort of shaking the camera. It gets really pretty wobbly. And you compare this to the Everyday Astronauts feed, and it's like, it's like maybe his camera's farther away and he's got a better lens or something. But anyway, the first interesting stuff happens at about the 35-second mark, which you don't see it so well on the Everyday Astronauts feed or the SpaceX feed. But you take a look up here at this guy, and it's like, boom. Yeah, that's a fairly convincing boom that you get there. And actually, it's not quite synced up on the Everyday Astronauts feed. But boom, yeah. And now, the bit that's most important happens at about the 60-second mark. And what we're going to go for here is we're going to take a look at, so it says it's lost another engine. But take a look at the liquid oxygen. In fact, I've got a blow up of this. There we go. So this is now a blow up of that bit there. And you've got to watch what happens between the 1 minute mark and the 70-second, right? So literally in about, so it starts about the 1 minute mark, and over the period of 10 seconds, you lose 10% of your oxygen. Boom, gone. And it took me a while to actually figure out, well, even just to come up with a proposal as to how the hell that can be. Now, you do actually see, you see it's basically pissing out one of the engines here, right? So how do you manage to vent 10% of your oxygen in 10 seconds like that? So if you take a look at what it does is they're roughly equal, Zumph, you lose a load of the oxygen, then they stay roughly matched for a while. And then towards the end, you get the exact same problem where the oxygen suddenly jumps down between 1 minute 70 and 180. Right, so again, it's about 15 seconds, you lose 10% of your oxygen, and then it happens again straight afterwards. So what you're probably looking at here, for me, this was a real head scratcher for a bit in the, if you just blown a hole in the side of the tank, then it would just keep going down. But it doesn't. You lose 10% of your oxygen, and then it stops. And so how the hell does that work? And in the end, the explanation I came up with, right? So we're talking sort of armchair analysis here, but it's basically the only thing it can be. When you think about it, there's only one conceivable explanation. And it's, what are rocket engines? Well, rocket engines are a combustion chamber, and that runs at some bloody ludicrous pressure. It's like 200-300 atmospheres, something like that. Very hot, very high pressure, and then you sort of puff it out through a hole, and that sort of collimates your exhaust gases and maximizes your thrust. So you've got to pump in your methane and your oxygen into that thing, liquids obviously, and you've got to do it at very high pressure. And so this is basically the whole problem with rocketry, is you fill up this rocket here with fuel and propellant over the period of about 2 hours, then over the period of about 2 minutes, you need to pump all of that into the engines. So the pumps that you have to do this are immensely powerful, and they run off, basically the only way you can run these things at such high power is they sort of run off rocket engines themselves, which I'll draw sort of like this. So you get your oxygen and your methane coming in there, and you burn it, and you use that to sort of spin a pump, and you use that pump to drive your gases into the chamber. So you would have thought that, okay, fine, so if I shut off the methane, then I just keep pumping oxygen at the same rate. But I think this is where their problem is when the engine's not burning, you don't have 200 bar in the combustion chamber anymore. You've got 0 bar, basically. And so you can have this fuel pump running, but now rather than trying to drive stuff in at 200 bar here, once you shut down your methane line, you're now just pumping oxygen through there at some crazy rate because there's no resistance to it. It's basically, it's not got any resistance to it. So that's how you manage to pump out 10% of your oxygen in some tiny amount of time. And it looks like that happens later on as well. Now, so what are our bets? We've covered this. Now, about the same time, people make a lot of this sort of thing blowing up here. This apparently is the hydraulic control. I wouldn't be able to tell you. And it doesn't really matter. What you can see from this side here is, in fact, let me get rid of some of this crap. Sorry about this. My boomer tech skills. There we go. So, like I was saying, about this time you get some stuff blowing off the side here, which I've seen some fans' analysis. They say this is the hydraulic, or one of the hydraulic units blowing up or something. That's, I don't think, what's critical, but needless to say, at about the white stuff, by the way, you don't want to worry about at all. You're burning methane and oxygen to give carbon dioxide and water. As you go up through the atmosphere, the pressure goes down, the temperature of the atmosphere goes down. You're pumping basically steam into the atmosphere. It just condenses. It's a contrail, basically. And yeah, you see you got loads of engines out. But it's about this time, right? 105. This feed here, you can see that the rocket is arse down. And that continues. So what you'll see is, the rocket basically goes from, where are we? Yeah. It's arse down like that. And then it basically just flies over, and after that it goes into a spin. So let's see what we got. You start off going arse down, and then it just goes over the top, and that's it. Boom. After that, it's just an uncontrolled spin. So the actual control portion of the flight is about 2 minutes. And then SpaceX cuts away. Yeah, I mean, you can see it's all spinning. This is all cryogenic stuff here, but you can see the differential light as it's just tumbling out of control. And yeah, it's about here that if you take a look at the SpaceX feed, you see all these green puffs of those green puffs there. Oops. There you go, green puffs. Like that. So those green puffs are basically Raptor engines self-destructing. So on top of the half dozen engines you've got out already, you're continuing to lose them, and it just sort of spins uncontrollably for a bit after that. Now, I saw an analysis from Scott Manley that says that the flight control system, or the flight termination system on this thing, just basically blows a couple of holes in the tank. And so you see one of them starts there and the other one there. So now you've got these two plumes coming out from your rocket. Now, all of this time the engines are still firing. It looks that by the time you're up to this point, you've lost probably half of your engines, it looks like to me. And even at that, the way these things work is all the time you've got thrust on this thing, you expect the fuels to be seated, right? If you just turn the engines off, then all this stuff starts. Yeah, everything goes to 0G and it starts floating around when it's in free fall. But you're not in that regime. Your engines are still firing. You expect the fuel to be mostly seated, which is why, you know, if you take a look at your methane tank readings here, they're with the one exception where it jumps up for some bizarre reason, which is about now. And then it drops down again. This is maybe tank slosh, but it's clearly not that big of a deal. But if you blow a hole in the top of the tank, you don't really expect that to do a lot in terms of venting your liquid. So what you've got is, I think the top pressure of these tanks is about 2 atmospheres, and you blow a hole in that and you just leach the gas out. Well, it's going to take an awful long time to get the liquid out from the bottom of the tank. Apparently it's around the bulkhead that the flight termination system goes, so yeah, that might be a little more effective. But if you take a look at where the explosion comes from, the explosion clearly comes from the engine side. So when we get round to the explosion, it explodes from the engines. And the reason for that is what you're probably doing is pumping explosive mixture into the engines. So both liquid oxygen and liquid methane have very similar properties in that they're sort of fairly hydrophobic liquids. You expect them to be very, very miscible. So what if you get your oxygen from your top tank dropping down into your methane, when that gets pumped into the engines, it's going to blow up. The way the engines work is you need a nice steady flow of gases going in here, and then the combustion takes place in a controlled fashion in the combustion chamber. You start pumping explosive gases in before here, and it just blows up everything. So that's probably why it blew up. The altitude that you're at here when it does blow up is, I think, like 40 kilometers or something, which at that altitude you've lost something like 90% of the atmosphere. Rough numbers. Planes fly at about 10 kilometers, and at that you're down to about a third of an atmosphere. This was up at about 40 kilometers. I don't know the exact numbers. I would guess you've lost over 90% of the atmosphere by then. Methane probably won't burn at that altitude. There's a reason why with rockets you need to take the oxygen with you. It's because there's nothing up there to burn, right? Or to burn your methane in. So, if you blow holes in the tanks, it's not entirely unsurprising that it doesn't catch fire. The only way it can really explode is if you mix your liquid oxygen, of which there is very little left, with the methane, of which there is lots left. So it's probably the engines blowing up that sort of does it for you. And when you do blow up the engines, you just basically, the whole thing is a huge green silo with, by the time it's oxygen on the bottom, oxygen on the top, methane on the top. Oxygen on the bottom, methane on top, yeah. When you blow a hole in there, if there's not much oxygen left, I'm making this up as I go along at the moment. So, that's roughly what you've got. You've got almost no oxygen left. You blow a hole here. your methane comes down here. When that goes into the engines, that's when it blows up. So, had they waited till they were completely out of oxygen, which they almost did, the flight termination thing it's like a minute before the whole thing blows up. It's at well, there you go. So it's venting there, both at. So it's about 2:05, and it blows up at the 2:40 40. So it goes quite a time after being triggered till it blows up, and yeah. So the summary of things that go wrong with this: not enough engines light up on the launch. Comes off the launch pad drunk. 35. It looks like an engine blows up very spectacularly on the distance shot. I mean, it's boom. I mean, that's that doesn't look healthy. And then about the 1 minute mark, you pump out 10% of your oxygen, which, yeah, that's basically that engine there, one engine. And from the 2 minute, from the 2 minute mark, the rocket is out of control. It spins for a bit, and all the time it's spinning, yeah, you've got thrust. You expect these things to still be mostly accurate, but it's clear you lose other engines around this time. You see the green plumes, and you pump out the rest of your oxygen very quickly. And I don't know why they do that. There might be a good reason for that. That the engines might blow up if you don't do it in that order. But the mere fact that they run the turbo pumps for 10 seconds, pumping just cryogenic oxygen out through the engine, that, at that rate, one of those would be fatal. You got to bear in mind that roughly the way that rockets work is, actually, as I make our rocket spindly, if we've got 100% of the mass on the launch pad, 90% of that is fuel, and about 10% of it is the actual rocket. And ignoring the summation of the maths, about 1% is what makes it to orbit. Okay, so the mere fact that you lose 10% of your fuel here, instantly fatal. And it looks like that happens 2 or 3 times. And I still don't understand what was going through their heads when they were thinking about launching this thing. It looks to me like Musk was fairly adamant that he knew it was going to fail, at which point you ask yourself, well, why do this? And my suspicion is that they knew that their engines were death unreliable, but at that point, what are you going to do with them? Right? They're very expensive paperweights, and there's nothing you can do with them. So at that point, maybe we just try and do something. Of course, didn't quite work out that way. It trashed the launch site, and unless they managed to get these engines astronomically more reliable, this thing is dead on arrival. And NASA is relying on not just one of these launching. So there's going to be a modified version of Starship that's going to be landing on the moon. As far as I know, they've done nothing to even start designing that, for maybe the sensible reason that unless you can actually get the whole thing to actually fly, there's no point in actually designing the interior of a lunar lander. But rest assured, with the Apollo era stuff, that was an ongoing concern from very early on, because just keeping people alive in space is actually quite challenging. So, but let's just say you've got the thing that you're planning to land on the moon here, and it's not just one of those that you've got to launch, because one of those just puts the lander into orbit. You then need to launch 5 extra missions to refuel it before this can head off to the moon and maybe do its landing and all that sort of thing. These have to be done in rapid succession, and the failure of any one basically scrubs the whole thing, in that whilst you're sat there in orbit, whilst what they have with Starship kind of works out okay, in that you pump the fuel into it over the period of about 2 hours, the loss to the environment is not so great over a period of 2 hours. But once this top guy here gets into orbit, well, half the day, half the 12 hours of the day, let me rephrase that. It's going around the Earth once about every 90 minutes. So 45 minutes of that, it's in the Earth's shadow. 45 minutes of that, it's in the full, unrelenting sunshine. So cryogenics, the average temperature of the Starship you expect to basically be fairly similar to the average temperature of the Earth, which is 300 Kelvin, whatever, room temperature, that sort of thing. Difficult to store cryogenic gases or cryogenic liquids for long periods of time like that. So all of these refueling missions have to take place in rapid succession. Otherwise, you just end up boiling off all of your cryogenic liquids in orbit. And yeah, I don't see this happening. Not that I'm actually sort of pretty. I was a great fan of the Apollo, but it was necessary with Apollo. With Apollo, they sent men to the moon. And the reason initially was just to beat the Russians, of course, a national pride thing. Later on, they sent geologists to the moon. Very expensive day trip for geologists. But the thing is, robotic exploration really wasn't there. So if you wanted to do real geology on the moon, you had to send people. And so it kind of had a purpose like that. Well, times have changed, and now the robotic rovers are kind of as good, apart from you don't need, now if you were to send people to the moon, the overwhelming amount of the expense just goes to keeping the people alive, which you could send like 50 robotic missions for the same price as sending people. And, so what purpose do the people actually serve in this mission? Putting people on the moon. I'm skeptical about if there is any science that they're actually going to achieve like that. And the idea that this is a stepping stone to Mars. Well, maybe you kind of learn how to keep people in space for long periods of time, but do you really learn that much more than sort of doing it on the International Space Station? It's just with that, it's a lot cheaper. Is there any real science that they're going to get done on the moon? And I'm not so sure. But it's jolly impressive. In terms of a technological achievement, it's bloody fantastic. Relying on SpaceX for the lander, I don't see this happening. Yeah, maybe the first thing they need is a reliable engine. If you don't have a reliable engine, it's dead on arrival. There's nothing you can do with that. So it all boils down to, yeah, from the very beginning, Musk's deal with the Raptor is it was going to be the highest chamber pressure engine, blah, blah, blah. Lots of superlatives. But, yeah, that's basically just made a rod for their own back. The engines blow up, they're unreliable. Can't make a rocket out of unreliable engines. Anyway, so I've rambled on, I think, for quite long enough. Yeah, that's a straightforward reading of the SpaceX launch. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, I'll see you next time.